Okay, right. So w- this is just the last bit of that section, and really, they're really talking about what happens at the end of a business, if you like. So if you're selling off a business, well, of course, because you are selling off. Oops, sorry. Yes, because you are selling off the business. Technically, you should charge output VAT. That's the sort of scenario, and in effect, the person buying the business from you will have to pay this output VAT, and then it gets passed on to HMRC. But the key point here is that there is output VAT on this business, which definitely will make the business much more expensive. But it makes no sense for someone the person buying it to pay for it and then claim it back if the person, well, of course, when I say buy it back, if the person is VAT registered, we can save that stress, if you like, by having it transferred as a going concern, because if you're VAT registered, you can claim it back, but there's no need to stress yourself there. But really, this matters. Typically, I mean, it is a normal taxable supply, the sale of a business, of its assets. But the question then becomes: is the person VAT registered? Because it is a normal taxable supply. So again, like I say here, you can see it is a normal taxable supply. Charge output VAT on assets transferred. But if the person is VAT registered, we don't have to go through that stress. So we literally transfer it as a going concern, and it is not treated as a supply if those VAT conditions are met. So what am I saying? What does that mean? If the business will continue, your VAT registered and the business will continue as a going concern, continue to trade, no break in trade, then the person accepting the business, if you like, well, even if they're not VAT registered, to be fair, as long as they accept VAT registration immediately after the transfer, then that's fine. It won't be a taxable supply, and no output will be charged on the assets transferred. Well, again, nothing is, and of course, because no VAT is charged, well, no VAT can be recovered. Well, that sort of makes that kind of makes sense. So the key point here is that's what goes on with sale of business. You're unlikely to get an actual question where there's a sale of business, but it's important to know. Um, so normally, when you do these sort of things, the registration would apply. But again, like I say, if you make a joint election, you can then just transfer everything over, and the next person carries on. Right, so that's the end of that. Right, output VAT. There's this business of when do we actually recognize, if you like, the goods as having left us for VAT purposes. Now it's actually quite straight. It's actually quite a bit of college work or material to know, because once you understand it, it's actually quite good. Here's the key point. Let's start off and let's kind of evolve this a little. Think about the fact that, if you like, invoices have taken over our lives and really direct a lot of, if you like, accounting nowadays. Not really much about goods, but let's go back to when this really started. So, if you know, again, if you're going to be, well, dealing with VAT, it's important to know when the supply actually occurs. So the date the supply occurs for VAT purposes is known as the tax point, if you like, when this thing was actually, when the transaction actually happened, or when, sorry, let me put it like this, when the transaction happened, so to speak. Now, what does that mean by when the transaction happened? This starting point, with starting point, is referred to as the basic tax point. So let's just go back to old school. You drop some goods for someone, when they're collected, delivered, or made available to the customer, then click, it happens. Or you offer a service, you stay at a hotel, and they're performed, that sort of thing. So that's what used to happen. Basic tax point, and we're all quite happy with it. It worked. And then you would then, if you like, calculate your VAT based on that, from deal with when you deal with your quarterly and what period it is, because right, we pay VAT quarterly, so you needed to know, January to whatever March, January 3rd, the 1st to the March the 31st. It's important to know the date so we know what period it's in. That's the key point here. So, of course, I'm going to sort of focus here. I mean, you do have special scenarios here, but this is only for knowledge as well. So if you have continuous supplies, so where now it's totally random, it's all over the place in terms of goods, well, we just talk really in terms of invoice, which we'll come back to this invoice and payment. So we almost ignore the goods and just focus, because you have continuous supplies, so we can't really start measuring talking in terms of goods. We can only talk in terms of invoice and payment. And these are the big words here, invoice and payment. And the key point is, as you can imagine, it must be, right, whichever one is earlier. Because if you get the money early, well, you should pay VAT from that point. If the invoice comes early, because we really want to think of it as invoice is king. We want to guide things via the invoice. The invoice is what feeds into our financials packages in terms of raising invoices, order, invoice, payment, blah, blah, blah. But if payment comes first, well, then you should pay your VAT earlier. So invoice is king, invoice is the driver. Goods were once king, but invoice is going to be king, dependent on conditions. So let's sort of carry on and see how that really works. This is just a special scenario, but the key point fundamentally is that when the goods are collected or delivered, that's your basic tax point. That's my starting point. Then now I need to kind of check to see if I have to amend for invoices or for cash. Right, so now here we are. Here's what's referred to as the actual tax point. So a question will tell you what's the question is really the aim of a question in any exam is asking you about the actual tax point. So you will need to know what the basic tax point is, and then from there you would have to work out what the actual tax point is. So this is when you would actually recognize the goods as having transferred, so you can know the date to which to assign that good for the period that they were talking about. So actual tax point, what's the first thing? Like I said, you need to identify the basic tax point. Identify it, be very clear. You've got it. That's to do with the goods, when the goods actually happened. Now, like I said, so imagine your goods happened here. Now, of course, first things first, if for any reason the tax invoice was issued, if your client received the tax invoice, if there's any tax invoices being done before the goods were delivered, or there was payment before the goods were delivered, well, as you can imagine, it kind of goes back to our continuous goods scenario. Well, this becomes irrelevant because you have access to the money, the invoices come through, invoice is king, everything will happen here. So I'm just going to show you if that happens on or before the basic tax point and a tax invoice has been issued and a payment has been received, well, the decision made is the earlier date. It must be you have received the funds, you have received the invoice, everything's taken place, whatever it is. The invoice is the driver, really. Yes. Well, we now have scenarios where, okay, the goods have gone and we now have the invoice sent afterwards. So now, right, of course, the basic tax point is important. That's kind of what you would do. But because we want to keep things nice and we're in an automated world now, we would like to make the invoice work. So if the invoice kind of happens a few days later, well, that's fine. We can just stick to the invoice because that's really the driver. As I said earlier on, invoice is king. But at what point do we sort of get thinking, well, this invoice is not coming and therefore HMRC are thinking you're just delaying our VAT payment. So they give you 14 days. So the argument is that if the invoice arrives within 14 days of the actual goods being dispatched or whatever, then you can recognize the invoice as the actual tax point and work from that. And so that invoice, everything continues to work with the packages nicely. But if it's outside of the 14 days, then we go back here and say when were the goods actually, if you like, delivered. And that's it, really. And so we'll do some examples, but you can see here, has the tax invoice been issued within 14 days of the basic tax point? Well, yes. Well, the invoice is the driver. The invoice is the driver. Otherwise, no. If it's outside it, well, you have to go back to the basic tax point, the goods themselves. Right, let's see an example here. So what do I have here? I'm just going to do this just little timeline so you can see what's really happening here. So goods removed on the 2nd of September. So that's a basic tax point. The goods were sent out 2nd of September 2009. Invoice issued all the way back here on the 28th of September. Well, that's not good enough. Typically, you now have to recognize, because we will allow 14 days so that we can work with you. You say these invoices are needed for your systems, they work best. We don't want any confusion, but this is too far. So literally, the 2nd of September kicks off as it's a basic tax point, and that's also the actual tax point, right? Because 14 days, the invoice has exceeded the 14-day period. We cannot wait. Goods removed on the 18th of April. Sorry, I'll just do that here. On the 18th of April. an invoice issued on the 24th of April, but you got the money on the 16th. Oh, so as soon as you get the money, think about it. I mean, of course, you got the money, so straight away we must recognize that. So here's your basic tax point, but your money has come in early. So in effect, you sent out the goods after you got the money. In effect, so the actual tax point must be the 16th of April because you got the money before you even sent off the goods. So that's it. Goods removed on the 6th of December. So where are we here? We have 6th of December. Invoice issued on the 4th of December. That's, if you like, invoice issued on the 4th of, oops, sorry. Things, invoice issued, sorry. Second, I just need to pause the video very quickly. Oops, sorry, I was interrupted there. So goods removed on the here are we? Goods removed on the 6th of December. That's fine, but again, here we are. It says that the invoice was issued on the 4th of December. So we have a scenario here where your paperwork happened, your invoice, if you like. So think about it. I mean, as soon as you send out an invoice to someone, they might start sending you the money straight away. I mean, if actually look at it, you sent out the invoice on the 4th of December. Within 14 days, you got paid. So really, the invoice, again, like I say, invoice is king. Anything that happens before the actual goods is the actual tax point. So goods removed 6th, but the invoice was issued before. So here we are, 4th of December, right? Earlier, better than later is the key point here. Goods removed on the 15th of March. 15th of March, invoice issued after that, and the invoice was issued within 14 days on the 22nd of March. So we can go with the invoice. The invoice is our driver. So this becomes the 22nd of March, right? So that's how we deal with that. Let's do the next example as well, because that's a good one as well. So what do we have here? It says on the 1st of November, Green Limited ordered a new machine. That's fine. Ordered, not he didn't get an invoice. And then he paid a deposit of 7,500. So straight away, payment of money will, before the goods arrive, I mean, the goods will arrive. It says the machine was dispatched to Green less than 2 months later. So you have the goods happening here. But here we have some payment. So straight away, this will trigger a VAT response because you have received money well before sending out the goods or whoever's received the goods. So that straight away will trigger a VAT response. So on this one here, the 5th of November becomes the tax point where money was actually received. And so now the goods have been received, and it says that an invoice was on the 20th, was 2 months later. So here we are, for 5th of November. So it says that an invoice was issued on the 20th of January, and this was paid on the 1st of May. This really becomes irrelevant. The invoice was issued on the, where is it? On the 20th of January. So the goods less than 2 months later on the here we are. This is the date I was looking for. The machine was dispatched on the 2nd of January. So I have 14 days to either record to record an invoice, to have an invoice being used in reference to this balance of 32,500. If I want to use an invoice, not the goods. So 2nd of January. So I have up to the 16th of January, but I sent the invoice on the 20th of January. So the invoice is too late. So I must record the date. The tax point becomes the date the goods. The tax point becomes the date the goods were actually dispatched. So the basic tax point becomes the actual tax point, right? Not the invoice. So here, 2nd of January, because that's when the goods were actually dispatched, and the invoice has not arrived until like whatever 18 days later. If that was going to happen, it had to arrive within 14 days of that. So that's the 2nd of January, and here we have the 5th of November. So great. I think that's a good. I think because the next topic is rather different. So we'll end this video on that topic. Cool. Great stuff.